Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG's Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now then, as tempting as it would be to mention the heat, I'm going to ignore that subject, as I'm quite sure we've all had enough of mentioning it. And I suggest, Dennis, we move straight on to the podcast.
Well, indeed, Helen. Even my fan has given up and it's just blowing disappointment at me at the moment. I'm feeling sorry for myself here.
Dennis.
I need comfort.
It has been hot though. It's
It
too hot.
has.
See, I can't help myself. I can't help myself.
Mm.
But enough of the heat, Dennis.
Yes,
What's the
yes.
first topic today?
Right, yes. This is the reports from the SRA about the increase in misconduct cases. Misconduct reports about solicitors have risen 27% in the past year and 58% over 2 years, the Solicitors Regulation Authority has revealed. And in the 6 months to the 30th of April, the SRA reviewed 8,955 new reports about potential misconduct, an average of 1,493 a month, would you believe, compared to 7,034 in the same period in 2024 to 25, and 5,654 the year before.
That's quite a serious uplift, actually. But well, I suppose positive news, if you can look at it that way, is that it did not translate into more investigations. So if you look at the figures, 1,322 reports were escalated for formal investigation by the Assessment and Early Resolution team, and that was over the period of the last 6 months. Now, this compares with 1,479 in 24 to 25, so it's actually gone down. But nevertheless, a lot more than in 23 to 24 of 937.
In total, and sorry, there's more numbers, as of the 30th of April, the SRA was handling ongoing investigations linked to 1,844 reports of potential misconduct, again lower than at this point last year, but markedly higher than 2 years ago. The figures aim to support the SRA's bid for a 29% or £25 million increase in its funding for the year 2026 to 27. That's the practicing year.
Yes, and actually that's going to affect the in-house and local government sector as well.
Mm.
So Jonathan Peddy, who's the Executive Director for Investigations, Enforcement and Litigation, he's quoted as saying that they've seen an unprecedented increase in the reports they receive, putting significant pressure on their approach and resources. And he said that in the short term, the SRA have diverted resources from elsewhere, but that this isn't sustainable, as we need strength in all areas, he said.
Indeed, and going on, he said, as outlined in our recently published draft business plan, we need to consider a range of fundamental changes to the way we work in response to this changing dynamic.
Yeah, and the SRA set out in its business plan last week that it needs to invest in technology, improve senior expertise, and add capacity, capability, and skills in key areas to deal with the influx of misconduct reports. And this will include bringing in greater automation to prioritise cases that should be referred.
And the regulator will consult on a revised test for when reports should lead to an investigation and a review of the existing caseload to confirm cases being pursued are proportionate, well-founded, and have strong prospects of success. Now, the budget for investigations and enforcement will increase from £36.2 million to £40.4 million in the next financial year.
And it has previously reported that the Solicitors Regulation Authority faces an unprecedented cash call on the profession, comprising hefty increases in practicing certificate fees and the compensation fund contributions. Of course, solicitors are going to pay an extra £100 next year as a result.
Yeah. In its business plan, the regulator announced that its budget for 2026-27 must rise by 29% to £111.5 million to fund a complete overhaul of the organisation. And to meet this demand, the SRA proposes to increase its call on the practice certificate fee for individual solicitors from £190 to £240. Now, that will cover 40% of the SRA's requirements. The remaining 60% will be charged to firms and calculated based on turnover. But clearly, Helen, as you mentioned earlier, this will cause some controversy in our sector as well.
Well, I think that's going to amount to thousands for some of the big big
Yes.
city
Hmm.
authorities, unitaries and the like. Well, the SRA are holding a roundtable on the 18th of July, specifically for the in-house and local government sector, which will look at, now it's published its plan, it looks at its priorities for the next year. I'm going to be in attendance, and solicitor members can sign up to attend that via the SRA homepage. Now, in other news, the government has opened a call for evidence upon which it aims to inform the mental health strategy for England.
The Department of Health and Social Care has launched a call for evidence to inform the development of a new cross-governmental mental health strategy for England. Published on the 15th of May this year, the exercise is intended to shape a long-term framework for reform and delivery across public services, including local government.
So, the call for evidence forms part of the wider 10-year health plan, and that plan sets out three strategic shifts: hospital to community care, analog to digital services, and sickness to prevention.
Yes, and the policy context appears clear here, Helen. Demand for mental health support has increased significantly, with particular pressure in relation to children and young people. And at the same time, access remains uneven and waits remain too long. The current system is widely recognised as reactive, fragmented, and inconsistent.
Well, the proposed strategy is intended to address these challenges by establishing a system that intervenes earlier and more proportionately. Now, the overarching aim is to enable people to participate fully in education, employment, and community life, supported by services that respond before crisis point is reached.
Now, the call for evidence is focused on gathering practical insight rather than purely theoretical views, and the department is seeking implementation evidence and examples of effective practice from across sectors.
So, the key areas of focus include the following: early intervention and prevention. So, that's including expansion of mental health support in education settings and wider community provision.
Then there's integration across services with particular emphasis on coordination between health, housing, social care, education, and community services.
Mm. And there's access and waiting times, especially for children and young people and those with more complex needs.
And next, workforce and funding, and this will include how services can be designed and commissioned sustainably.
Yes, and then we've got digital and data, obviously important, exploring how technology and data can improve access, outcomes, and systems intelligence.
And next, there's inequalities, of course. The call will focus on addressing variation in access and outcomes for undeserved and marginalised groups.
Now, the strategy expressly recognises that mental health outcomes are shaped by wider determinants, such as housing, employment, social care, and community infrastructure. Now, responses to this are submitted via an online survey administered by the Department of Health and Social Care, and the consultation, or rather the call for evidence, closes at 11:59 p.m. on the 10th of July 2026. Let's move on, Dennis, because there's new guidance in the licensing world, I believe.
Well, indeed, there is. And in recent weeks, sadly, there have been a number of announcements from government to support councils in dealing with anti-Semitism. Now, the government has announced plans to strengthen guidance for local licensing authorities, setting out how existing powers can be used more robustly to prevent events or venues promoting anti-Semitic behaviour or content.
Now, this move forms part of a wider package of measures unveiled in a written ministerial statement on tackling anti Semitism delivered by Community Secretary Steve Reed on the 14th of May this year. Now, Reed said that the rise in anti Semitic incidents since the 7th of October terrorist attacks had created, quote, a crisis for all of us, stressing that local authorities must be equipped to act decisively when venues or organisers enable hateful or extremist activity.
The updated guidance will clarify how councils can apply existing licensing frameworks, such as conditions, reviews, and enforcement powers, to address events that risk promoting anti-Semitic content or threatening community safety. The strengthened guidance will sit alongside a broader government strategy called Protecting What Matters, which includes new oversight measures for charities and universities, expanded disruption powers against extremist groups, and the use of the Online Safety Act provisions to tackle harmful content.
Well, Reid did emphasise that these steps were developed in consultation with Jewish stakeholders and are intended to give local authorities clearer routes to intervene early and prevent harm. Now, the announcement follows a summit convened by the Prime Minister on the 5th of May, bringing together leaders from policing, civil society, education, culture, and business to address anti Semitism across society.
And ahead of the summit, the government committed an additional £25 million for police patrols and protective security for Jewish communities, bringing total funding this year to £58 million, and expanded the Common Ground programme to support communities facing anti-Semitism. And Steve Reid said the government would continue to use the full strength of the law to counter extremist activity and ensure Jewish communities feel safe. Strengthening licensing guidance, he added, is intended to give councils greater confidence in using the powers they already hold to prevent venues becoming platforms for hate.
Well, we definitely will update members when the guidance is finalised. Now, I thought this was interesting, Dennis. This is the independent research into government transparency releases by the Ethics and Integrity Committee. Now, as part of its lobbying, disclosure, and access to government review, the Ethics and Integrity Commission asked some companies called Spotlight on Corruption, Transparency International UK, and Unlock Democracy, excuse me, to conduct research into the operation of government transparency releases.
Helen, the Ethics and Integrity Commission's research provides a detailed examination of how lobbying transparency releases operate in practice. Its focus is narrow but important: how information about ministerial and senior official meetings is produced, published, and used.
Yeah, well, transparency releases are a long-established mechanism. Let's take a look, because members might not be familiar. Different to ours in local government. Introduced in 2009, so let that sink in, through which government departments publish details of meetings involving ministers and senior officials.
Under the Ministerial Code, ministers must report discussions relating to official business. Departments then publish this information on a quarterly basis. Each release is expected to include core information, that's the date of the meeting, the individuals involved, and the purpose of the discussion, including any relevant policy or legislative context.
Yes, and in parallel, the statutory register of consultant lobbyists requires those undertaking consultant lobbying to declare their clients each quarter. And the intended model is that these two data sets together provide a coherent view of lobbying activity.
Interesting. In practice, however, the process of publishing transparency releases is fragmented. Departments publish their data separately using different formats and file structures. There is no single centralized platform, and as a result, compiling a complete data set requires manual collection and consolidation of individual files.
Well, guidance sets out expected publication deadlines by quarter, and even allowing for these timelines, releases may only appear, according to the research, several months after the underlying meetings, reflecting the design of a quarterly reporting cycle.
Now, the research identifies several consistent weaknesses in how the system operates. Timeliness is the most prominent issue. Although there's been improvement in some periods, transparency data is typically published between 3 and 6 months after meetings occur. In some cases, delays are considerably longer, including instances where data was released years late due to administrative error.
Well, the report also highlights variability in compliance. So, publication against formal deadlines fluctuates significantly between departments and across different periods, suggesting that timelines are not consistently embedded. And a second issue is the quality and usefulness of the information provided. So, descriptions of meetings frequently were found to be very generic, with little detail about what was discussed, which limits the ability to understand the nature or significance of engagement. And that's despite existing guidance requiring more informative summaries.
And gaps in the data are also identified. The research found that some meetings known to have taken place were not included in transparency releases, and this does raise questions about completeness and therefore reliability.
Yeah. And the report also looked at accessibility as a further challenge because it said that transparency releases are dispersed across multiple departmental websites, published in inconsistent formats, and as you've alluded to, Dennis, often difficult to locate or search. And
Mm.
even where data is available, it's not easily usable without additional processing.
Yeah, now finally, the report finds that transparency releases are difficult to reconcile with what's termed the register of consultant lobbyists. For example, it may not be clear which client a lobbyist was
Mm.
representing in a specific meeting, limiting the ability to track influence effectively across data sets, which must be a key point in all of this.
Absolutely, it's what it's designed to do. So it's really interesting, actually, Dennis. I know it's not local government specific, but it is all about governance and transparency and,
Yeah.
and the variance across central government, local government, blindingly obvious there. Um, the report is, of course, linked in the bulletin for those who want to learn more from it. Now, I've noticed AI is once again back in the news via a Law Society news item I received. I think it was this
Yep.
Tuesday, in respect of Pinson Masons. Yeah, Dennis. In what context have you been looking at AI?
Well, I think generally speaking, Helen, the stories about AI are negative rather than positive.
Yeah.
Not usually good news, but I think this was interesting because it's a novel use of AI, and led me to think, and I wonder what colleagues listening to this think. What other uses AI can be put to other than those that commonly come to mind? And I should say that the Pinson's item is in the next bulletin. I've seen that, but this story is a positive one because a family court judge has used generative AI software to boil down and explain a ruling for parents with limited ability to understand what it actually meant. In one of the first recorded instances of a judgment being explicitly written, part with AI, Her Honour Judge Hesford appended two additional judgments with the agreement of all parties and their advocates.
Yeah, and these extra sections were produced from the full judgment, but wholly using the secured judicial AI application based on Microsoft Copilot, following prompts to simplify and summarizing what had been said.
And both partners involved in the care proceedings have learning and cognitive difficulties, so to help them, they were able to read both a simplified summary and one in bullet point format.
In her notes, the judge said all advocates agreed that they were immensely useful and they've been attached specifically to show how useful AI can be when carefully used in such situations.
Indeed, and the case itself was a fact-finding hearing over 5 days to establish the circumstances of how B, who is now 2 years old, suffered a head injury at 8 months while she was in the care of her biological parents. The local authority, which was not identified in the case, has applied for a care order, which is opposed by the married parents.
Yes, and the matter will now proceed to the welfare stage so the court can determine the child's long-term future. Well, we have only ever found bad news stories about AI being used in court proceedings, Dennis, but this
Mm.
definitely is an example, well done, of a beneficial use. That sounded a bit patronizing. I didn't mean it to.
I think it
Um,
was, yes.
take it as such. But it is an example of a beneficial use to assist understanding of what might be complex issues,
Yeah.
and indeed used by a judge. So there we
Yeah,
go.
I mean it's quite extraordinary, really, and it set me thinking. Do members, I wonder, have similar examples of AI use in proceedings that's got this positive slant on it? Let us
Mm.
know on the forum page of the website.
Yeah, I think it's all to do with how you instruct Copilot and what you tell it to
Mm,
rely on only and things like that. Because it is a useful language tool,
mm.
if used in the right way, I think.
As
But
we've said many times, you have to verify everything, but it's a useful starting point tool, I think, as long as it's not the be all and end all of any
absolutely,
research that you're doing, and as long as you verify things, that's the key message, isn't it?
it is. And I think you need to know what you're doing when you're using it.
Mm.
So, what was Dr. Google, now Dr. Lawyer,
Yeah.
through AI is a worry. Um, But we turn now to our final item of the Grapevine's Gone Fast. And this was reported in the local government lawyer. But let's take a look at the matter of Mudford Parish Council and Somerset Council, which concerns whether or not Somerset Council planners misinterpreted policy or misled councillors during a planning dispute. Spoiler alert, they didn't actually, but
Well, no, we wouldn't pick on a case like that, would we? Of course they didn't, and it's worth a close look, this one. This claim concerned a challenge to the grant of an outline planning permission by Somerset Council for a substantial urban extension at Yeovil, comprising up to 765 dwellings alongside non-residential elements, including employment land, a neighbourhood centre, and community infrastructure. Fairly routine stuff, I think, Helen, to this
yeah,
point.
at that point, yeah. So the claimant parish council objected, that's Mudford, contending that the development failed to comply with policy YV2 of the local plan, because that stated that the allocation, quote, should provide specified elements, including employment land and a neighbourhood centre.
Indeed. Now, the central issue was whether that policy required the actual delivery of those elements, or whether it was sufficient that land and mechanisms for their provision were secured, leaving delivery to market forces. Now, the claimant argued that the council had erred by permitting residential development without ensuring that employment uses and the neighbourhood centre would be delivered, thereby undermining the concept of a sustainable urban extension.
Mm. Well, the court identified two principal strands. So, the interpretation of the policy and whether members were misled by officer advice. And on employment land, the judge held that the policy requirement to provide approximately 2.58 hectares of land for economic development did not extend to requiring built employment units. The officer advised that the policy was satisfied by allocating and servicing land was correct. The terms of the policy were to provide employment land in contrast to provision of buildings for employment uses, and that advice was correct and therefore contained no legal error.
On the neighbourhood centre, the court accepted that the policy contemplated built development, stating that the word provides in respect of the neighbourhood centre means that the centre has been constructed and is in use by or before the completion of the residential development. However, the judge rejected the contention that officers had materially erred or misled members. The debate before the committee concerned the application of the policy rather than its interpretation,
Yeah.
particularly the timing and mechanism of delivery.
Now, the judge emphasised that whether a scheme would provide a neighbourhood centre is a judgment for the decision maker based on the evidence and planning context. Officers in this case were entitled to conclude that the marketing obligations, which were secured through the Section 106 agreement, gave sufficient prospects of the scheme being delivered as a whole. And it was not necessary for them to require delivery at a specified trigger point, nor to be certain of delivery.
Applying the principles in the case of Mansell, the court found that members were properly advised and were being invited to take a positive view of the prospects of delivery. Accordingly, the court concluded that officers neither misinterpreted the policy nor misled members of the council, and the claim was therefore dismissed.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 19, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye bye now.